Hey guys, what's up? So I'm really excited to talk about Chad because I happen to be an Iranian American who was raised here. I very much understand kind of where they were coming from with the show. Nasim, I believe, is her name. I want to give her credit because I know she's been working on this show for like so many years. It's kind of her baby project. So that's cool. Let's get down into what did I think about the show. This is the first episode. I think it's really interesting because deep down inside, as an Iranian, I enjoyed some of the Iranian humor that was added to it. I'm not actually quite sure if that humor landed or not, and that would actually be so wonderful to hear from you guys to see if did you think the uncle was entertaining? He seemed pretty universally entertaining, but he was probably the most Persian type of humor, which is so cool to see. Like TBS, it's like a major network, and you have like Persian humor. Never really thought I'd ever see that. So I really enjoyed that was there. That type of Uncle Hamid character is so like it's such like a homage to like Iranian sense of humor. So I know that there's maybe some thoughts of like, oh, are they making fun of Persian culture? I could understand the perspective that that's the case because it is such a stereotypical thing. But most of us have a relative that is kind of like that, just not as exaggerated. Most of the show, Chad, it does represent things that, immigrants go through and specifically Iranians go through. That's great. But it was all very exaggerated. Also, there was some really interesting humor about like the revolution. I love that's something that probably would only come from somebody who's actually Persian, who's actually Iranian, and I love that. That type of humor landed really well with my parents, and it's that kind of thing that audiences would find funny, but only like Iranians or people who know about that time period of like the Iranian Revolution would really get that humor. It's kind of like that little thing that they add that is just like a wave to the audience for people who get it, but it's funny regardless because that whole scene was funny. So there was that. But actually, the show isn't that Iranian overall. The show didn't have to be just, oh, this is a Persian show. Hopefully, like American audiences enjoy it. It was actually tailored towards American audiences, and it's framed in Persian culture, just very roughly. So I'll explain because that's actually not where I thought they were going to go with it, and I was almost pleasantly surprised. While maybe I know some Iranians kind of wish it went more, I don't think so. I don't think it needed to be because I don't even think it needed to be like making fun of Iranian culture or anything like that, or just making an Iranian sitcom. So like the mom character, that's not a very relatable character because most of us in this time period who are first generation Iranian immigrants have parents who are immigrants, who are kind of Americanized or pretty Americanized depending on how they wanted to assimilate, but are still pretty Persian. And like there's that. This mom was like basically an Americanized mom. And that was such an interesting choice because I don't know anybody who has a parent like that who's a firstborn Iranian American immigrant. So that's really interesting. I found that to be really interesting because it provided opportunities to kind of expand upon what you believe. And I think she, as the person who created the show, took some interesting risks that actually I think paid off because it was more of a show about a kid trying to figure out how to be in middle school and how to fit in. And then it was just framed in Iranian American culture to show that style, to show that life, to show what it's like to be an immigrant or to come from an immigrant family. So that was really, that's what the show was. And that's like a really good choice, in my opinion, that they made. So basically the mom's like kind of young and she's like divorced, which is also kind of interesting because yeah, Iranian Americans don't tend to get divorced. Immigrant parents don't tend to get divorced. Culturally, and just like in the last generation, that wasn't as acceptable or just part of that culture. So that's really interesting. So you come from divorced parents, and like she's starting to date, and like talks about a Muslim, and then the Muslim is just some like really cool, trendy, whatever black guy that the son now looks up to. That was such a flipping everybody's heads on their table kind of moment, which was so cool. Of like, yeah, and then the son Chad is like really into like this new guy, and it's like for problematic reasons. Like he's like, oh, black people who are good looking and look cool are super trendy. Like that was hilarious. If you didn't realize that was like a subtle jab at like how we view things and how we view trendiness, especially when you're trying to fit in, that was like hilarious and so perfectly made. They added all of the elements of like just a middle school coming of age. And I love that it was mature. Absolutely love that, because middle school you were mature and you weren't. Like you were mature in your language, but you're immature emotionally, and some people are more mature than others, and they did that. So them talking about like sex and like him calling his sister like, you know, that like that all is so realistic, and it was so great, and it was so funny the way they did it that I was just like really into it. So when it comes to like cringe comedy, so I am not the biggest fan of cringe comedy. Like I don't appreciate it as much. I appreciate it, but I don't usually find it that enjoyable. I'm sorry, I was laughing the whole time, which was so important to this kind of show. Regardless of like inclusivity, regardless of like how you frame it, and is it funny? I was laughing throughout the whole show. The thing I'm nervous about is that its novelty might start to wear off, and it might start to feel a little tedious. That's something that I could see happening that I'm hoping doesn't. And it might not, because it wasn't just funny because she was a dork. Like it wasn't just like, oh, this is like a loser kid and it's like kind of funny to watch them just struggle. Like that was apparent, that was there. But it was actually funny because the lines were really funny. Almost like so many lines hit. They were super enjoyable. I was like laughing the whole time. And like because I'd seen the trailer so many times that like, because he just kept popping up on TBS, I didn't find those lines to be funny, and it was because of how worn down they were. But when you're first hearing some of these lines, and when they're done in the more mature side that you can do when you actually show the show, I was like, they were landing so hard about like, oh, like I don't want to be Muslim. Like, well, how about we just be normal people? And like, this isn't what I'm talking about. And like the way that she went up to people and was like being cringy, and like that whole scene in the hallway that's making fun of movies. All of those were landing. They were so funny. Her like sucking on the jewel, but it's actually a USB. Those were so funny to me. So not just the Persian humor, the Iranian humor. It was just the actual like humor of the show landed for me, and I appreciated that because that's very important. So it didn't come across like it was just taking advantage of a culture or cool, I wanted to just do this because it's my passion project. The show was written funny, and then it just incorporates all these other elements. So that was great. I really enjoyed that, especially for somebody who doesn't like cringe comedy. Other aspects, let's go into like some of like the more like realistic undertones of why it was cringe, but it's like almost like a, not even a satire. It's just like, it made me like think. I like understood, and I was almost uncomfortable at parts, but I wasn't. It was just like there was tension of like scenes about like, yeah, when you're in middle school, you lie about having sex. Like that happened. Talking about like the person that you met and hooked up with. Maybe it wasn't sex during your time period, but maybe it was just like, oh, you hooked up and whatever that meant from camp, and they'll never get to meet them and yada, yada, yada. That was so apparent, that like that was so common. And I love that he was considered lame and just like overlooked the whole time until he brought that up. And then like people liked him, and it's just his interaction. And like for most people that would like, okay, cool. He would bounce off that and try to be cool. But in the end, Chad is who Chad is. And Chad's not there yet. Chad's like emotionally not there yet. Opposite of like the more intense girl, you know, he's just like a kid inside. And I love that. I love that it showed the differences in like aging, because that was very apparent in middle school and high school of some people aging at different speeds than other, which is okay. And I just like really enjoyed the way they do that. That was really fun for me to watch. Like No, I don't remember a time where somebody lied about having sex and it put them in a bad position. But it was telling a unique story. I love that the stories weren't 100% like I didn't experience them, but they were new. Like that was so interesting. What would happen if you did lie about sex and somebody was like, cool, that person then gets it and isn't going to be weird about it, so I'm down. Like, what would happen in that instance? And him going over and then drinking for the first time, and like it becoming a weird experience, and him like crying about it like a little kid because he really is a kid trying too hard to like be cool. Not even trying too hard to be an adult, trying too hard to be cool and wishing being cool wasn't being an adult. So there was actually more to it than just humor. And like I appreciate that. I appreciate when you can like get value out of a show, the message, the understanding, the realism that a show can have. Now on that same side, you have the exaggerated qualities. So like yeah, I don't remember anybody having like absinthe and like talking about their like European boyfriend. I don't remember times where people were just handing each other like bag full of gummies filled with weed. Maybe that's changed. That it may have, but like some of it was just like a little bit exaggerated. The chronic fatigue syndrome person, they all seem like just like caricatures and like just really like interesting, like larger than life personalities. I know people were bullied, but like this idea of like somebody coming in and pushing them out of the way and then talking about their DJ business was just like making fun of the generational culture, which I could appreciate, but it was like over the top, which is fine because it's a comedy and it's not like it's not like supposed to be like a drama. So I actually really enjoyed that aspect of it, but it was just something to note that like, yeah, it was exaggerated, but then it had like a grounded message and grounded moments that were still funny. I want people to take a second to appreciate how hard it is to balance that. So as a show, really enjoyed it for what it was, and as a comedy I was laughing. That's all you really need, and I was laughing pretty consistently. And then as an Iranian, I liked how much they put into it. It was enough, but it wasn't too much. It wasn't like it hit the minimum of like me thinking that this actually is a Persian show. Like it has Persian qualities. It's representing part of the culture without going over the top. Because yeah, I'm in a pretty Americanized Iranian American. So part of my culture and who I am is like that culture side. And some of it's just like being an American. And that balance was like really realistic. Rather than just like it blending completely together, it was just two cultures meeting really hard while you're coming of age. And that's freaking really terrifying. But then if you do it the way that they did it, it's really funny. So loved it. I know some people probably thought it was maybe a little problematic. When it comes to culture shows, it's hard to do it in a way that's not insensitive. But I thought it was really great. My parents thought it was really great. So I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on that. Let me know if you guys thought it was funny, if cringe comedy just doesn't work for you, if you enjoyed like the humor that's a little bit outside of maybe your culture. Because we can appreciate that. I can appreciate a show that's not about my culture at all and is a completely different culture because it is fun to just experience culture. So let me know what your guys' thoughts are. And on that note, I'll catch you guys in the next one.